This is the Debunking Economics Podcast with Steve Keen and Phil Dobbie.
The Archives.
Episode 354. What if we paid a realistic price for energy?
Because we inherited a bunch of formulas from the Labour Party that shoved all the funding into deprived urban areas.
I remember well when the Reserve Bank was just a bond-selling agent of the Treasury.
That the United States economy added almost 5 million jobs.
All of their red ink is really our black ink.
This is the Debunking Economics Podcast with Steve Keen and Phil Dobbie.
Now, we know we don't pay a fair price for energy. Energy companies are making a mint because they extract the energy without worrying about most of the externalities, like the disposal of their waste or the impact that they're having on the planet. Just as cigarette companies don't pay for the health service, fossil fuel companies don't pay the full cost of the impact they're having on our planet. But what if they did? Would the economy survive? That's this week on the Debunking Economics Podcast with Steve Keen and Phil Dobbie. That's me. Welcome along. So, Steve, according to globalpetrolprices.com, Australians paid last year 21 US cents per kilowatt hour of electricity. So what would it do, just as for example, if we said, well, OK, the real price, and I'm sure it's more than twice that, but what would it do to the Australian economy if all of a sudden you said, right, we're going to charge you twice as much. Electricity is going to cost twice as much, or power generally is going to cost twice as much of what it is now?
Oh, I wouldn't. I might go back to the general picture of, is there such a thing as the right price for energy? And this comes back to, where does wealth come from in the very first instance? And little things like the laws of physics. And as one of Musk's favourite sayings is, the only laws are the laws of physics. Everything else is a recommendation. So when you look at how do we actually produce goods, how do we get ourselves above the level of the other animals on the planet, okay, to live in a society? We exploit free energy. Okay, we find energy existing either in coal deposits or oil deposits or ultimately nuclear and so on, and we use that concentrated energy to give us a higher level of energy consumption per head than we could ever get if you're out there throwing spears at other animals on the plains for our food intake. Now, one of the other laws of physics is what's called the second law of thermodynamics. And that says that energy degrades over time. Energy can neither be created nor destroyed, but the organisation of that energy declines over time. There's the law of entropy. So you start from a low level of entropy, which means a low level of disorder, and you go to more disorder over time. Now, if you look at what we do with in production, we take stuff which is less ordered and make it more ordered. Okay? We take clay and we make coffee pots out of it. That law, the law of thermodynamics, says that increase in order, which goes against the second law, overall is balanced by the waste we generate in doing that. So that we are actually generating more waste in the aggregate than we would be without our industrial activities. Now, if you try to say, let's conclude the price of that waste you generate, as well as the refined products you create, into the price of energy, I don't think we can have any form of society at all.
Because how much greater would it be, do you think?
I don't.
As a multiple of how much we're paying now?
Well,
is anyone ever?
You'd be losing money. Okay.
Because it would be more than people would be prepared. Because it would be more than people would be prepared to pay for it.
If you had to pay, like it's something which accumulates in a slow fashion initially. If you look at the initial damage done to a mining region by mining starting, then it starts off small and the slag heap grows over time. But in a generic mathematical sense, to exploit free energy, we can do it because it's sitting there free. We didn't create the coal. It was just, humans found it in the ground, and it involves hundreds of millions of years of geological processes and biological
processes. It's not totally free, though, because we've got to get it out of the ground.
We've got to get it out of the ground. But the old, again, we're going to do the TV show story here. Are you old enough to remember the Beverly Hillbillies?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Jeb goes out and fires a shotgun at a rabbit and misses the rabbit, and this black stuff, Texas tea, comes oozing out of the ground. And that
it was that easy. Yeah.
That was the state. If you go back to Philadelphia when the first real oil rigs began, then literally it was a case of just drill a hole in the ground, and if the hole hits where there's a reservoir of oil, it'll come gushing out of the ground. You can't stop it. That was the original state. Right. And so you get an enormous energy return on the energy invested.
And now, of course, alternative sources are getting more expensive for the cost of extraction, for the efficiency of the extraction.
We've had a necessary decline over time. But but it's still
a lot less than it's actually.
When you use the energy, when you use the energy, you generate waste as well. I mean, I've seen interesting calculations that say that the mass of carbon dioxide that we've injected into the atmosphere significantly exceeds the mass of all manufactured items on the planet. Okay, now we never price that carbon dioxide. Okay. If we did try to price the carbon dioxide, would it be profitable to make the manufacturing goods?
So is this
I'm not sure. Honestly, I don't really know the answer to that question.
So is this a nonsense then? So the Brookings Institute reckon that if you added, and they're not factoring everything in here, they've just said the social cost of energy, so the harmful emissions, and interestingly, the consequences of foreign policy decisions, which come out of fossil fuels as well. How many wars, for example. Then coal power plants in the US, which cost 3.2 cents per kilowatt hour of electricity. This is a couple of years back. They should be 170% higher, so it should be 8.6 cents per kilowatt hour. Well, I mean, that's sort of like, well, okay, we could cope with that, couldn't we? If society was faced with things costing 1.5 times on top of what we're currently paying, we could cope with that.
We could potentially cope with it, but I mean, to me, it's not so much whether we can cope as the scale of exploitation of energy we're doing on the biosphere.
Well, we'd do less if it cost 1.5 times more.
And if we were doing less, I mean, if we were doing the amount of energy consumption that 2 billion humans would do with the current distribution of income, that'd be 1/4 of the damage fundamentally to the biosphere that we're doing, and maybe there'd be more chance to cope with that. So it's not so much the price as the volume, the quantity of energy we've exploited, and then dump that waste into the biosphere. And by not thinking about those costs, by being not
we are paying some of those costs, aren't we? I mean, when some of those costs clearly some of them are down the track because climate change starts to hit home, but we're paying some of that now in mitigation costs against climate change, and then all the pollution, we are paying for it in healthcare costs, for example. The difference is we're not paying for it based on consumption. The state's paying for those things a lot through health services and the like, and through infrastructure, rather than us paying as a consumer. If the cost was passed on to the consumer, then we might change our behaviour.
Yeah, I mean, but at the same time, what really makes being wealthy or living a decent lifestyle in our current society is the consumption of energy. And this is one thing which, I mean, I've only really become aware of it myself in the last decade since I've been working in climate change research, because we take it for granted that you're going to go to the bathroom and turn a tap and hot water will come out. Okay? And, that we can go and flick a switch and then there'll suddenly be light inside the room. And we just don't even think twice about it. But if you put yourself back 150 years or 200 years and then say, who can flick a switch and have hot water come out the pipe, the answer would be the king.
Yeah.
That'd be it. Okay.
We're going backwards on this quite a bit, by the way, because, I mean, there are people in the UK now who they turn the hot water tap and it doesn't come on because they haven't fed the electricity meter because they're on a prepaid meter and they can't afford to pay for it all.
Okay.
So,
but in general, we've been energy blind. We're aware of the extent to which our lifestyles today reflect an enormous increase in the consumption of energy per capita over what was commonplace 150 years ago.
So, I mean, that's just adding to my point, isn't it? That if we could find a realistic price and if we tried to engage all those social costs and put all those social costs into the price of energy, given that we are paying for them anyway, it's just that we're not paying for them on consumption, then we might change our behavior, and companies might change their behavior as well. Because if they say, "Oh my God, we're getting hit with a tax for the real cost of producing fossil fuels," that makes it more realistic for us to look at alternative energy sources.
It's sort of arguing the price system can solve all these problems, and this is again why I like the laws of physics are the only true laws. Everything else is a recommendation. To believe you can use the price system to solve a problem caused by the basics of thermodynamics, I think is just fallacious. I think we need to be far more energy aware of the extent to which our lifestyles depend upon energy, and aware of the costs now of extracting that energy. Again, if you go back 150 years, the cost of extracting that oil out of Philadelphia was trivial. Okay, and then that was where the huge fortunes, the Rockefellers and co. Came from, the exploitation of cheap energy sources. And that's where the wealth in the Arabian world has come from as well, the same story. So you now have a much more expensive reality that you've got to drill a couple of kilometres offshore, a couple of kilometres into the seabed, below a couple of kilometres worth of ocean. The cost of getting it out of that much higher. We're still not... and then what was really has happened is the damage we've accumulated over time, the waste we're putting into the biosphere. That's the main cost. Now, if you tried to price that out of existence, I think you'd price industrial society out of existence. I don't think you can. You
wouldn't expedite the move to renewables?
Well.
That was hence my first question. What would happen if we doubled using those?
Where does the money go? Okay. Because if you doubled the cost of oil and it went to the oil majors...
well, they'd get even healthier profits than they're getting now. That's
what's been happening in the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
Part of the reason.
Hence the windfall tax, though. Yeah. To say, well, okay, we're going to... It doesn't help. It hasn't helped with inflation.
So the price system doesn't solve that issue, because unless the extra price is going to the oil majors... rather than going
But if you tax the oil majors, the problem is it's a planet-wide solution, obviously, because the oil companies would say, well, if you're going to do that in the UK, we just won't invest in the UK. And what are you going to do? You're going to tax us on oil that we extract from Saudi Arabia or wherever?
And the mobility of the corporate sector versus the fixedness of a nation state.
Right, but if we saw it as a global issue and everyone was on board in this surreal world that I'm imagining, which can only exist in dreams, of course, because we don't operate like that. But if we did, then if the world saw, yes, we've got a threat, we are going to push the oil companies to pay a heavy duty on a per unit cost of extraction, then they would look at alternatives, and we would be paying a more realistic price. And would that create a downfall of society, or would it just expedite the move to an alternate source of energy?
Well, it would mean you have far less money left over for other products apart from energy at the moment, because energy is in everything. This is one of the...
Well, the money's going somewhere, though. The money's going to governments. There's more money going into the public sector. They can spend that money on whatever they like.
They could provide the finances for private corporations in alternative energy sources and so on.
Yeah, or they can look after people. We were talking last week about pensions. So they could go into ensuring that people get that pension.
One of the best... It really is difficult. I mean, I've thought about this issue. Could you price energy at a realistic level, including the waste that's generated by exploiting that energy, and end up with the capacity to have an industrial civilization? I honestly don't know whether you could, or I haven't sat down to try to work it out. But one thing I've seen just in the last couple of weeks, you may have noticed as well, is that Microsoft has made an advance payment to a company to provide it with fusion energy by 2028. Have you seen that?
No.
Quite amazing.
Yeah.
Fusion energy has always been 30 years in the distance. Now they're talking 5.
So we might get some amazing transformational technology.
That source of energy.
Right, but that's dangerous talk, Steve, because that's what you're talking about there is hope.
No, I'm not into hopium, as you know. But the thing is, I'm glad if that actually happened. What you'd have is, whenever that is developed, if we actually develop the capacity to generate power out of fusion, then the wastes are virtually non-existent. Okay.
Oil industry would you still got to get it up to scale, obviously.
Okay, but if that happened, we would simply add that to all the other forms of energy we're currently using on the planet. We wouldn't reduce, we'd add, and that would be causing even more extreme ecological crises sometime down the track. Now, if we go through a crisis and then have the stuff on the other side, then the argument can be we should be using this fusion power to drastically reduce our forms of other energy and drop average total energy consumption until our consumption and the waste we generate into the biosphere can be sustained by the biosphere itself. So, I don't think you can price our way out of trouble, but you can invest your way out of trouble.
Can't we do both? I mean, it seems like we're back to you talking about us. We have to go through the crisis before we actually moderate our behaviour. If we go through that crisis, then it's a bit of a one-way street, isn't it? Because you talk about coming out the other side. How do you come out the other side? If you've already pumped so much carbon in the atmosphere, it takes forever to dissipate, doesn't it? So this
comes back to the concept of energy return and energy invested. And I honestly can't answer the price question. I really can't. Maybe one of these days I'll be able to sit down and try to work it out, but I haven't done so yet. But I think the point which is important to get people's heads is the energy return on energy invested and how dependent society is on that being a large positive number. So the more energy you get back for energy in, the more of a sophisticated society you can sustain. And if you have to put most of your work into getting the energy out in the first instance, then you can't have an advanced society. And that's the situation of 200 years ago. It could be the situation of 20 years in the future as well.
Right. So there's two sides to that, isn't there? There's the how efficiently you are extracting the energy, and then there's how, and we'll come back after the break to talk about this, there's how efficiently you're using that energy as well. So the energy intensity, which varies enormously from country to country around the world. So I wonder what we can learn from that. It's the Debunking Economics podcast. Steve Keen is sitting opposite me. I, coincidentally, am sitting opposite him. And we'll be back again
There's conservation law there somewhere.
We'll be back again in just a second.
This is the Debunking Economics podcast with Steve Keen and Phil Dobbie.
So we are looking at energy and what would happen if we paid a realistic price for energy. Steve is not sure what that price would be, or whether in fact it would have
whether
the
it
impact.
would actually help.
Whether we could actually do what we wanted in any form if we were to do that. So just before the break, we were talking about the efficiency of energy. First of all, how it's produced, but also energy intensity. How it's used, and there's a variation on this. So oilprice.com, they reckon that this year's energy prices will rise to the point where they are 13% of global GDP. That's
13%?
Yeah. Does that seem small or large?
That seems large. I mean,
that's what they're reckoning we're going to get to this year.
That's interesting. Like one of the pieces of neoclassical nonsense I enjoyed rubbishing recently was by a guy called Rudy Bachman, and he and a few friends, using the neoclassical model of production, argued that energy, the change in GDP for a change in energy was the coefficient between the two is 0.04, which means that if you had a 10% fall in energy, you would have a 0.4% fall in GDP. Now, that's sheer and utter nonsense. When you look at the empirical data, a 10% fall in GDP would mean a 10% fall in energy would mean a 10% fall in GDP. So it's their model of production, which is nonsense. So we have an enormous dependence upon energy, but the figure they chose was 0.4, which is meaning their rough estimate of the size of the energy sector compared to the overall GDP was 4%. Now you're saying 13. That's huge. So if that actually happens,
prices have gone up so much, of course, haven't they?
Yeah. So 13, but that is a huge increase in the energy costs. Now, the trouble is, of course, that provides more money to the companies that are drilling the fossil fuels out of the ground. And well,
let's be positive. That gives them more money to invest in alternate sources of energy.
Which they won't do.
Yeah. Well, all their advertising is saying that they are.
You've got to trust. There's truth in advertising, isn't there? I mean, look, I haven't witnessed it, but of course, there's a very one of those very Australia's more interesting political figures, Tanya Plibersek, is now the Environment Minister in the Australian government.
Yeah.
And she, I've had a lot of
a smart cookie.
fair bit of respect for Tanya.
Yeah.
But she's now having to dance rings around the fact that at the same time as having responsibility for the environment, she's also been improving more coal mines and more oil. And the pressure to approve those things is enormous because they're saying, look, we can generate this much extra exports, this much extra revenue. And I mentioned in one of the last shows the political financial complex. It's also the political financial energy complex. Now, if you get to the stage where the energy companies are getting 13% of global GDP, that's an enormous amount of power.
It is.
And they will continue.
In every sense of the word. Yeah. Power in every sense of the word.
Yeah.
So, but surely if they are exporting more because they are using more coal power, surely responsible economies can say, well, if you're using fossil fuels...
Excuse me, are we allowed to use oxymorons in this
I know,
show?
All right. But I mean, okay, in this
economy,
ideal world that I sometimes dream about when I'm asleep, you'd be there saying, well, okay, we're just going to tax you. If you're using fossil fuels to produce goods because they're cheaper, then and we're not, then we should tax you. That's fair, because forget about the environment. You've got we've chosen to care about the environment. You haven't. You've got a price advantage. We're going to put tariffs on your imports. Why wouldn't you do that?
Yeah, and I would. I mean, there's this the whole argument that tariffs are nasty is another neoclassical myth. But yeah, if you say you want to,
a lot of stuff from China, for example, should be tariffed for precisely that reason.
Yeah.
Even though they're starting to make inroads,
one thing you can say in favour of China is that they're having a political sense for the entire country. Having a sense of national objectives, in other words, which is poo-pooed in the West. Part of that national objective of China is to dramatically increase its production of alternate energy sources. And there's a huge range of innovation going on in China, far more so than you can see in most Western societies. But nonetheless, they also have enormous use of fossil fuels, and that gives them a cost advantage over the West. And so, yes, okay, put a tariff up and, force the country that's doing to some extent more than most of the rest of the world to change from fossil fuels to alternate energy systems to do even more of it.
Yeah, well, they'll just do it faster. And that seems fair, doesn't it? So on the idea of how much because the other thing is we could just use less
and that I think is where we're going to end up.
Or we could use it more efficiently. So there's this huge variation in the energy required for each per capita level of GDP.
Yeah.
So, for example, Ireland, Switzerland and Denmark use less than 1 kilowatt hour per dollar of GDP per capita. Singapore, Bahrain and Canada use 2 or 3 times that amount. So you'd have to ask why such a huge variation. So some countries are productive with less energy than other countries are.
Well, I mean, that's where the data can get very confusing, because a large part of why you can have a lower energy per unit of GDP in Switzerland than in China, for example, can be because the Swiss are importing stuff. I mean, that's more Britain again than Switzerland. So if you look,
this is energy use. It's nothing to do with where it's coming from. It's saying, well, okay, per kilowatt hour, how much are you consuming? What's your GDP
yeah, but
growth?
It's still involving trade. Still turns up as part of the equations for GDP and all that data. So I'm actually going from looking at a data set on GDP and energy, which I've put together from World Bank data on GDP and OECD data on energy consumption. And if you look at the global level, the link between energy and GDP and change in energy and change in GDP is simply overwhelming. Like the correlation of energy in kilowatt hours terms with GDP in fixed American $2015 is 0.997. Okay. When you look at the correlation of the change in energy and the change in GDP at the global level, it's still a correlation of 0.86. That's crazy high. And what it really implies is that fundamentally to a first approximation, what GDP really is energy transformed into useful work. An energy model of production makes more sense than virtually anything else. Now,
but you follow that logic through, then you'd say that countries that are not doing terribly well, if you made
they're
energy
the ones who are doing the production.
Right.
Okay. That's why you get a higher ratio. Okay, the ones that are doing the consumption, they've offshored the energy. Okay?
Yeah.
So the whole financial pattern of the...
But those numbers were based on consumption rather than production. But my point is...
the consumption, you're consuming goods which you're importing stuff in Switzerland, you're exporting it from China. You're going to get a higher ratio in China than you are in Switzerland. And it just reflects the distribution of production and power and political power more than it does whether you're efficient or inefficient.
So Rwanda, for example, uses 0.2 kilowatt hours per dollar per capita of GDP.
And that's much more realistic.
So a lot less than anybody else, or than the West. So logic would say, well, okay, if their economy really wants to grow, they could intensify their energy use tenfold to be the same as Canada. How can Canada say to Rwanda, no, you keep that low level of energy intensity and keep your economy small. We don't want you to grow. I mean, you can't say that, can you?
Well, it becomes
it's unfair to say that.
It's unfair at the moment, but if you say, what is forget about what's fair to people, what's fair to animals, okay, what's fair to the biosphere, and on that front, we're consuming in the West far too much energy. Because the damage we're doing to the biosphere, the encroachment we're making on the biosphere is huge. And so if we want to have a sustainable, it goes beyond society, a sustainable ecosystem, life on this planet, we're going to have to reduce the extent to which we take energy out of the system and dump waste back into it. And that means we have to say what level of energy consumption per capita is compatible with a sustained life on Earth. And I don't think we have to fall quite to the level of Rwanda per head. We certainly have to fall far below the level of Canada. And then because how can you have a drop in energy consumption while still maintaining a relatively comfortable existence for humanity? That's the sort of question I'd rather be asking.
It's going to be an interesting negotiation if countries are all saying, well, let's agree on our energy use per capita, because you're going to get, Canada's going to say it gets cold in here. We've got heating to pay, and Australia's going to say, our air conditioners, they don't come cheap.
We'll never work out. We'll never make a decent political decision over this. It'll be, again, the laws of physics will rule, and whatever humans try to decide, it will trump. And
the price mechanism is just no good. So is there, first of all, the fundamental question, for it to work, there'd have to be a high degree of elasticity in demand, in usage, based on price for energy.
But there isn't. There isn't. That's one of the flaws in the conventional thinking. If you make energy more expensive, you can't consume something as an alternative to energy. There is no alternative to energy. So there's some things you simply have to have, and nothing can be produced without energy, so that it ramifies through the cost of everything. So what you're saying by paying a higher price for energy, you're saying a lower standard of living. Now, I happen to agree with that. I think we do. We have far too high.
Well, for some. So there was a UK government paper from the Department of Energy and Climate Change, as it was in 2016. I think that's the climate change bit. I'm not sure. I don't know.
Not a worry anymore.
Anyway, this paper from 2016 showed that between 2005 and 2014, gas prices effectively doubled in the UK.
Yeah.
High income earners reduced their consumption by 9%. Low income earners reduced it by a third. So there is a elasticity there for the poor.
Yes. Yeah.
Because they've got no choice, they just can't afford it.
Yeah,
and that just demonstrates, doesn't it, that there's the issue is that it's easy exactly, and it's easy to reduce energy consumption for those people who can't afford it. Just put the price up, and they'll use less because they just have to wear more jumpers. The rich will will forget to turn off the air conditioning when they go on holiday for their in the Caribbean, and come back 2 weeks later and go, oh look, left the air conditioning on. Oh, that's going to add a bit to our energy bill. Oh well, let's open another bottle of champagne. They're not going to feel it, are they?
No, and that's the inequality combined with the excessive use of resources. That's the combination which has put us in a bind right now. And of course, political power goes to the wealthy. So the ones who are required to reduce their consumption the most are the ones who've got the power to oppose that.
So can we reach a system then where we do price in the social cost? Is it possible? Is there even a model? If the world was to agree that this is the way energy is going to be priced now, can we, and then said, once we've arrived at that price, we have to work out a mechanism where the poor can afford to pay, where less developed nations can afford to grow. I mean, how would you even start to price it?
In some ways, that's what the limits to growth did.
Right.
In the 70s. They didn't include a price mechanism in their thinking, which is one of the reasons neoclassical economists trashed them. But they did look at what's a sustainable scale of operation for human civilization on this planet, and can we achieve it? And it said you can, but you've got to do a whole lot of controls we've never implemented. Population controls. They wanted to have us reducing population from 72, not increasing. We've certainly doubled population since 72. Okay, maybe even more than that. So we've gone to the opposite.
Well, that's the only way we can improve productivity, which capitalism depends on, is throw more people at it.
Yeah, which is nonsense, but that's what we've done. That's Ponzi scheme investing rather than real investing. So,
that's because we've tried it the other way, economies stagnate, don't they? We've tried it the other way, and economies stagnate. So we just go, okay, that's what's going to happen in the UK, for example. We're going to say, well, let's open, let's allow more migrants now because apparently we need them.
And totally racist about refugees. God, we're a mess, aren't we?
Yeah.
I'm not just talking about our show.
No, which is ending very messily. But I'm just trying to, if we could develop, so you're saying if we don't have a pricing mechanism, I'm not quite sure how we do it, that's all.
Well, it has to be political as well. Yeah. And it has to be constraints. I mean, the whole idea about a price system is let the market work it out. And you, again, to quote not Musk here, but Einstein, you can't solve your problems with thinking that caused it in the first place. So we had the idea about unconstrained growth, market deciding everything, libertarian attitude in general. We can afford to be libertarian in outer space. We can't be libertarian on a biosphere. And
we can't get to a situation where we go, well, let's just create a situation where green energy is affordable, old style energy, fossil fuel energy isn't affordable. Problem solved.
And again, we know the issues about the green, because the green isn't green; it's brown. It's the minerals industry, as Simon Maichow argues. So there is, we have enormous problems in going across to an energy system which doesn't damage the biosphere on the scale of what we're doing right now.
Right. So its energy intensity becomes the focus then. Yep. If we were looking for one metric, it's that energy intensity focus.
And that's why I say energy return and energy invested. That's the thing we should be thinking about far more so than a price mechanism.
Yeah, not just energy from extraction, but how we use it in our society as well to get the outcomes.
That is also the distribution of income. Those private aeroplanes should become homeless people's hostels.
Well, there's a thought.
Plenty of hangars to use and comfortable seats and so on.
I'm not sure that they enjoy it very much.
I'm sure I'm going to be very popular in Westminster with that comment.
All right. Well, there we are. We haven't solved that, have we?
Never again.
Because no one ever will,
Indeed.
I guess, until it's too late, perhaps. All right. Next time, the generation game. No, we haven't got Bruce Forsyth back. Do you remember Bruce Forsyth? No, he was there was a show called The Generation Game. I think they had it in Australia as well. We'll talk about it next week.
Okay, you can fill me in the
we're not actually giving you the generation game. Well, it's a very old pop culture. But we'll look at the generation game. Have we built an unsustainable model? Basically, old people with assets of increasing worth and young people having to borrow more to survive. How do we get into that situation, and should we fix it? And if so, how? All of that. We should be able to do that in half an hour.
Absolutely.
All that next week on the Debunking Economics podcast.
Gotcha.
See you then.
Okay. The Debunking Economics podcast.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, then please share it with your friends, like it on YouTube, and subscribe to this channel.